deployments, and we recognize that. And they've done incredible work throughout the world, and we also recognize the sacrifice of their families, and may I say your families. We're pleased to welcome 4 distinguished general officers as witnesses. General Frank J. Grass is the Chief of the National Guard Bureau, a permanent member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, represents more than 460,000 citizen soldiers and airmen in the Army and Air National Guard. General Grass has appeared before this subcommittee in his capacity as chief on several occasions, so special welcome to you again, General Grass. Lieutenant General Stanley E. Sid Clarke III is the Director of the Air National Guard. This is General Clarke's second year to testify before the committee. General, we appreciate the experience and expertise that you bring to this hearing. Major General Judd Lyons is the Acting Director of the Army National Guard. This is General Lyons' first year to testify before the committee. We welcome you, General Lyons. And finally, we're pleased to welcome the Chief of Staff of the Army Reserve, Lieutenant General Jeffrey W. Talley. He, too, has previously testified before the committee. Gentlemen, all of you are welcome. We're eager to hear your testimony, which will assist the committee to better determine the needs of guardsmen and reservists, whether at home station or deployed around the world. The subcommittee, with the benefit of your testimony, will gain a better understanding of the material needs of the services. Additionally, at the request of the Army, the Secretary of Defense recently approved a plan for the Army Aviation restructure. This plan, billed as a total Army solution, appears not to have considered reserve component alternatives as a solution, thus leaving the Army Guard with no attack helicopters. This initiative appears to be driven by financial constraints on the part of the Army. We will seek further clarification and clarity regarding this initiative. Still, given limited resources, this committee will continue to do everything possible to ensure adequate funding for the equipment, modernization, and readiness for both your homeland and wartime missions. Generals, we look forward to your testimony, but first I'd like to yield some time to the ranking member, Mr. Visklosky, for any comments he may wish to make.
Chairman, I appreciate you holding the hearing, and gentlemen, await your testimony. Thank you very much for your preparation and your participation.
General Grass, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Ranking Member Visklosky, members of the committee. It's an honor and privilege to be here today, and before I start, I would just like to ask that we all continue to keep in our thoughts and prayers the Fort Hood community that suffered a tragic loss yesterday. With that, I have with me today General Clarke and General Lyons. They will go into more detail. I'll try to stay at the strategic level, but they have great detail about the Army and Air Guard today. They're great wingmen with me. The National Guard does 3 things very well. We fight our nation's wars, defend the homeland, and build enduring partnerships both overseas and at home with the Army and Air Force. The National Guard is accessible, ready, and capable, and I might add it provides a significant value to the taxpayers. None of this is possible without the support we have received from this committee and our parent services. The investment made in the National Guard as an operational force have served the nation well over the past 12+ years. Also, the support we have received in the form of the National Guard and Reserve Equipment Account has been invaluable. Today, the uncertain fiscal environment we face is impacting the Guard. Congress provided some relief with the Bipartisan Budget Act, but the Army National Guard FY15 budget is projected to decrease by 7% from FY14 levels. This reduction degrades readiness of the operational force, which General Lyons will address in more detail. With the return of spending limits in FY16 and beyond, the Budget Control Act will further impact the National Guard. This will diminish Army and Air National Guard combat power as a result of our inability to sufficiently train, modernize, and recapitalize our force. We also face the prospect of a reduction in the Army National Guard end strength to 315,000 by 2019. This is below the minimum level risk, and it places at risk the Defense Strategic Guidance. Also very concerned about the future of Army and Army National Guard rotary wing aviation. I agree with the total Army that the divestiture of the TH-67 training aircraft and the OH-58 Scout helicopter is required to meet future funding levels and viable rotary wing fleet for the future, a viable rotary wing fleet. However, I do not agree with the proposal to take all of the Apaches out of the National Guard. We have provided an alternative solution that would transfer about 40% of the Apaches from the Army National Guard to the active component, while retaining sufficient Apaches to maintain 6 attack battalions in the National Guard. This provides strategic reversibility and maximizes cost effectiveness. With our combat-tested attack aviation capability that exists today in the Army National Guard. Our alternative plan affects just the Apache, and our assessment is that it still achieves the most of the savings needed under the Aviation Restructure Initiative introduced by the Army. I would like to end by stating at the very heart of the National Guard is our most important resource, our people. The well-being of the soldiers, airmen, their families, and their employers remains a top priority for every leader throughout the Guard. We will continue to aggressively work to eliminate sexual assault and suicides across the force and maintain faith with our people, the very same people who have put their faith in us. In summary, our national security demands the capacity and capability that the National Guard provides, both at home and overseas. At 1/3 the cost of active component service members during peacetime, the National Guard is a hedge against uncertainty in this turbulent security and fiscal environment. Today's unprecedented National Guard readiness posture offers options to preserve both capability and capacity, rather than choose between them. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General Grass. Lieutenant General Clarke, welcome.
Thank you, sir. Chairman, ranking member, other committee members, appreciate the opportunity to address you, and I'm honored to be a representative of the 106,000 Air National Guard members across the nation. Last year when I appeared, I acted like I knew what I was doing as far as the director of the Air National Guard, but I'd only been on the job for about 2 weeks, so I only told you what I thought from the field experience I had and previous experiences. But in that time, over the last 12 months, I've gained a greater appreciation for the people we have out there. All of us should be really impressed with the generation that's coming behind us. Remarkable individuals, highly resilient, very passionate about wearing this uniform. It makes my job easy when I get out there and visit the units, get an opportunity to talk to them, get a sense of what they think about their service. As long as the American people keep patting them on the back and shaking their hands in airports and things like that, you're going to have a tremendous force coming forward. I also wanted to let you know over the last year, as a part of the total force, working with General Welsh and Secretary James, what an outstanding partnership we have. Clearly, there's nothing that is off the table as far as discussions with the leadership, senior leadership of the Air Force. They've been very forthcoming, very engaging, a lot of collaboration, and we continue to focus on things as a total force and not as individual components out there. So they're looking for best solutions, best ideas, and it's just been a wonderful experience over the last year working with both of them. And of course, Secretary James just started 3 months ago, but I got to tell you, she hit the ground running. She's doing a great job.
She sure is.
Yes, sir. So with that, I also want to tell you the partnership extends in many places, and wanted to extend our appreciation for the INGREA accounts that General Grass was talking about. The flexibility, the speed of which we've done some modifications, everything have brought us up to a capability that we never had before. So I wanted to express my appreciation for that with the INGREA funds that we received. And also just wanted to conclude with we really do have a balanced strategy going forward with the opportunity to look at ourselves as a first choice for homeland operations. We look at ourselves as a proven choice for warfighting operations. And we look at ourselves as an enduring choice for security cooperation. It's a wonderful team to be a part of. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you.
Thank you, General Clarke. General Lyons.
Chairman Freeling-Heisen, Ranking Member Visklosky, distinguished members of the subcommittee, I'm honored to appear before you today. I represent more than 354,000 soldiers in the Army National Guard. Let me start out by echoing Secretary Hagel, General Grass, and many other senior leaders in saying that our thoughts and prayers go out to the victims and families that are affected by the terrible tragedy at Fort Hood yesterday. We are all one Army family, and we all grieve this morning at the losses we have suffered. Every member of the Army National Guard can look back over the last 13 years with a shared sense of pride, accomplishment, and sacrifice. Since September 11, 2001, we've mobilized soldiers more than 525,000 times. As part of our total Army, Guard units have performed every assigned mission, from counterinsurgency operations in Iraq and Afghanistan to maintaining the peace in Kosovo and the Sinai. Our soldiers have repeatedly heard from the most senior leaders in the Army that they are indistinguishable from their active Army counterparts. Furthermore, Guard soldiers have forged lasting relationships with 74 nations, and they've deployed alongside these partners to Iraq and Afghanistan nearly 90 times in the past decade. At home, our Guardsmen and women continue to answer the call whenever and wherever they're needed, as the responses to Hurricane Sandy, the tornado in Moore, Oklahoma, the record-setting wildfires in California, devastating floods in Colorado, and most recently the mudslides in Washington State all attest. Thanks to the firm and committed support of Congress and the Army over the past 13 years, our Army National Guard has transformed from a strategic reserve to an operational force. It's a force that's manned, trained, and equipped to serve where and when America needs us. It's a force with experienced leaders who are ready. Given the current global climate, there can be little doubt that the Guard is more important than ever. Now, I've had the distinct privilege of serving in the Army National Guard for over 34 years, both in the enlisted and the officer ranks, and I've witnessed this positive shift to an operational force firsthand. I've gained perspective on the federal and state missions that the Guard performs while deployed abroad and during emergencies here in the United States. So if I could summarize my testimony today, it would be this. We must be very careful to ensure that we preserve the operational force that we've built. The Army National Guard provides our country with flexible military capability and capacity that cannot be easily replaced once it's gone. The fiscal year 2015 budget submission required hard choices and has significant impact in personnel and our operations and maintenance funding. The base budget request for these two accounts is just under $1 billion below what was appropriated for FY14. So this will require the Army Guard to accept risk in FY15. Our brigade combat teams will be limited to achieving individual, crew, and squad-level proficiency in their training, and their personnel will have fewer opportunities to attend schools and special training. Our depot-level overhaul of our trucks will be deferred, and our armories, which average 44 years in age, will lack funding for repairs beyond those that will ensure health and safety. However, as General Grass notes, this reduction pales in comparison to what will be required when Budget Control Act levels of funding return in fiscal year 16. With committed citizen soldiers in our formations, the Army National Guard presents tremendous value to our nation and to the communities where we live, work, and serve. The last decade plus of war has demonstrated our strength as a combat-tested, ready operational force, a role that with your support we will proudly continue to perform for the Army and for our nation. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to your questions.
General Lyons, thank you for your testimony. General Talley.
Chairman Freeling-Heisen, Ranking Member Visklosky, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before you today. It's an honor to represent America's Army Reserve, a life-saving and life-sustaining federal force for the nation. I'd like to begin by thanking the committee for your steadfast support that you have provided to all the members of our armed forces and their families. Since 9/11, more than 275,000 Army Reserve soldiers have been mobilized. And as you're aware, I have provided the committee a 10-page statement that outlines the capabilities and challenges that the Army Reserve has and some specific ways that this committee and the Congress can assist in keeping us viable and strong in service to others. Therefore, I'd like to use the few minutes that I have now to share some real stories and experiences to you about your Army Reserve. On 9 November 2013, a typhoon struck the Republic of Philippines. The Army Reserve has almost 4,000 soldiers permanently assigned to the Pacific. Most of those are organized under the 9th Mission Support Command, a one-star general officer command commanded by Brigadier General John Caldwell, a proud resident of the great state of Tennessee and a huge Tennessee volunteer fan. I got a call the same day from John and General Brooks. Vince Brooks commands U.S. Army Pacific, about the crisis and the need for immediate assistance relief for the Philippines. I authorized and supported the immediate use of one of my logistics support vessels, an LSV-7, stationed in Hawaii to provide mission relief for an active duty vessel, and within 48 hours I had 13 crew members, traditional reservists, from 11 different units on active duty preparing to set sail. The LSV-7 sailed over 1,225 nautical miles and transported 230 pieces of equipment. That's 1,660 long tons with 4 lifts to transport equipment and strikers to the 25th Infantry Division from the Big Island to Oahu. I also called to active duty Brigadier General Gary Beard, an Army Reserve individual mobilization augmentee, who immediately left for the Philippines to assist in leading coordination on the ground in support of PACOM. We conducted many more missions, but this illustrates the ability of the Army Reserve to act immediately. We're the only component of the 3 components in the Army that is also a single command. I'm not only the Chief of the Army Reserve, I have the privilege of being the Commanding General for the Army Reserve Command. I exercise that command authority every day in service to requirements at home and abroad. On 29 October 2012, Superstorm Sandy hit the East Coast, resulting in immediate need for assistance in New York and New Jersey. I authorized to active duty the same day our Emergency Preparedness and Liaison Officers. We call them EPLOs. EPLOs are embedded in the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, and they provide direct linkage to the Department of Defense for support in times of crisis. The Army Reserve provides the Army 100% of its EPLOs and 50% of all the EPLOs within the Department of Defense. Requirements for military assistance were quickly identified within 24 hours. I had alerted multiple Army Reserve units to be prepared to go on active duty to assist their fellow citizens. When Sandy hit New York, I had multiple units on active duty and en route to the East Coast. Specifically, I had 3 logistics pumps and dewatering units that eventually located at Breezy Point, where they executed significant dewatering and relief missions to the residents and others in need. In addition, I had 2 Chinook helicopter teams activated to provide immediate support to Joint Task Force headquarters that the National Guard had established. These are just some of the examples how the Army Reserve immediately reached out to assist and support our Americans in need during a complex catastrophe. As the Commanding General of the Army Reserve Command, I have the authority to order immediate help when and where it's needed to assist our first responders, our police and our firefighters, and our state force, our great 54 Army and Air National Guards. And in the case of Sandy, I ordered troops to active duty via annual training for 29 days initially, and that gave us time to convert those orders to 12304 Alpha mobilizations authorized under the National Defense Act of 2012, with specific requirements being asked for by General Jacoby, the commander of NORTHCOM. The Army Reserve routinely provides this type of support to the various states within the United States in their need. My last story is a short one about an Army Reserve family, the Henshines. Don and Janet Henshine. Like so many military families, they love their country and they're proud to have their most precious resource, which are our sons and daughters, serve in the military. But what makes Don and Janet extra special, in my personal opinion, is the fact that they had 3 boys serve in combat, Iraq and Afghanistan, as Army Reserve soldiers. Their names were Landon, Cody, and a son-in-law named Jacob. All 3 became wounded warriors. The wounds and experiences of war were very severe to each of these 3 men. In fact, they were so severe that they would no longer be able to do what they wanted most, to continue to serve as a soldier in America's Army. The many months of multiple surgeries and treatments, physical and mental, took a tough toll on the family, especially when they found out that Landon, who had finally recovered from his war wounds, had developed cancer. Eventually, Landon died. And as Cody and Jacob continued to struggle with their own wounds and grieving associated with losing Landon, my wife and I got to know this family very well. In fact, my wife visited them every single week at Walter Reed during these many months. But this story has a happy ending. Normally what I would see in similar circumstances is you end up with a family that hates the military and resents America. But not here. Don and Janet and that whole family appreciated the tremendous support that the Army Reserve and the whole Army family gave them under these most difficult situations. Their courage, their commitment to our Army and to the nation make my contributions and those of so many others pale in comparison. Don and Janet represented to me the very best of what it means to be Americans. I'll certainly miss Landon, especially our talks in the hospital room about my Jeep J10 pickup truck and Duck Dynasty, which he liked a lot. But he taught me, an old soldier, a lot about giving and about dying. In closing, the Army Reserve is a community-based force of almost 220,000 soldiers and civilians living and operating in all 54 states and territories and in 30 countries. As a component in a single command, we're embedded in every Army Service Component Command and every combatant command, and we currently have almost 20,000 soldiers serving around the globe with over five
Of any task.
General, it is logical to conclude that the Guard units, reserve component units, bring a lot of value to the structure of our Army, in that these are not, for the most part, full-time soldiers. They are men and women who have other jobs and are able to manage that delicate balance between job, between family, and between their military duties to serve their country in a very honorable way. So is it not logical to assume that, that we can train, equip, man, and even deploy National Guard Reserve Component units for a fraction of the cost of what we do with our active component folks, trying not to necessarily divide us or become divisive in this discussion, but just to prove a point?
Congressman, as we alert a unit, there's additional training required, and that's because of the number of days that we train pre-mob. So there's always tasks to be accomplished, and we save about 1/3 the cost in peacetime. But it's all about time to deploy, time to train up and deploy, and also then what tasks you want that soldier to do, and they're going to do the same training and certification that an active unit will do before they deploy.
So back to my original thesis, that the decision in the aviation restructure program that the Army has advanced and that we drilled down on with Secretary McHugh and General Odierno, that I have concerns that taking all of the attack aviation out of the National Guard for budgetary purposes and putting it in the active component I think it's a flawed proposal because it robs the National Guard of any of the strategic depth that the Army would have in the event that all of its assets were committed. So you offered an alternative, you talked about this in your opening statement, but you offered an alternative proposal. Can you elaborate just briefly on it?
Yes, Congressman, I looked at across the board. We have 8 attack battalions today with 24 helicopters, mostly modernized Delta models. If I look back pre-9...
Modernized as a result of the generosity of this committee.
Yes, sir.
Sorry to interrupt.
And we had mostly alpha models, outdated in pre-9/11. And so we deployed those alpha models a certain number of times, either at the battalion or company level. And then there was a period about the mid-2000s where the policy decision was made not to send alpha models any longer and convert to Delta. We converted the Delta models, which we have today. We deployed 12 battalions and 5 company-level deployments. We were ready to do more. But now we have those modern aircraft with experienced pilots with, battalion may have 12,000 combat hours in it today. Our other concern, and why we put this proposal together, was when people come off of active duty, when pilots come off of active duty today, we want to be able to capture that, over $800,000 to get a pilot into the cockpit. So we feel that that's a great opportunity in the future, and retain, as you said, sir, that strategic hedge there, that strategic capability that is not easily replaced.
I'll come back when I have my next round of questions. I know I'm out of time right now, but again, my thanks to the panel for being here today and their great service to our country. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Chairman Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. I apologize for being late, but we were marking up another bill just now. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. Thank you for your service to your country. In this fast-changing world in which we live, there's no question that those who serve under the flag are doing so in a very critical period of our history. As we've seen a nation's sovereign power come under siege in Ukraine over the past several weeks, tragedy, unfortunately, once again hitting at Fort Hood, Texas, we are constantly reminded that our country, our freedom, and our way of life are not to be taken for granted. There must be vigilance, and you are providing that. I therefore want to associate my remarks with those of my colleagues in recognition of the fine service of the men and women that you represent here today, including yourselves. The soldiers and airmen of the Guard and Reserve have time and again answered the call to serve in some of the most difficult conditions domestically and abroad. And as this subcommittee has done in the past, we stand ready to try to provide you with the tools, the training, the equipment, and whatever during these difficult budgetary times. Mr. Chairman, if I may ask a couple of questions, especially, are you having trouble hearing me?
A little bit. You've got two mics now, double the trouble.
You're probably better off not hearing me, but in my home state of Kentucky, we have an incredible drug problem, as I guess most of the country does. And since 1998, the Kentucky National Guard has been an instrumental partner to our state and local law enforcement units in the fight against illicit drugs and transnational threats. Its Joint Support Operations Task Force has eradicated 13 million marijuana plants and seized over 76 bulk pounds of marijuana, 4,500 illegal weapons to the tune of $25 billion. I fear that as certain people in this country continue to spew falsities about the dangers of marijuana, demand is only going to increase. That's why the National Guard's counter-drug program and its military unique support is now, I think, more important than ever. General Grass, the fiscal 2015 budget request was greatly reduced from the fiscal year 2014 level, from $200 million down to $89.5 million. What's being done to ensure that this program continues to be adequately funded? I've flown on some of those raids in the choppers, and it's an amazing, heroic act that these guardsmen are doing, rappelling down in terrain that can't be accessed any other way, cutting the marijuana and being lifted back up with a big net sack back into the chopper and dangling as they fly across country to a place where it can be disposed of. This is hard work. It's great training, but I need to know where you're coming from.
Chairman Rogers, I'll ask General Clarke and General Lyons to talk about resources versus how we're going to prioritize against readiness and modernization here in a few minutes. Let me talk about, and I'll answer your question on the counter-drug, sir. One of the problems we've experienced, close to 50% of our counter-drug money has disappeared in the last 3 years. And thanks to the Congress, money is added back in each year. The problem that the states are dealing with is trying to build a long-term program and hiring, the Guard men and women that do this mission across the states, trying to get some stability so that we can give them a career path for this work they're doing for us. But when you only get a portion of your budget each year to start the year, it makes it very difficult that we end up having to basically lay off people and hire them back later in the year. So it's created huge disruptions. Not only that, we now are under instructions for next year to close down our 5 counter-drug schools, which have been so productive across the map. But tough choices are being made in those accounts. And I know that every state has talked to me. The adjutants general and the governors are very concerned about this. But Department of Defense, with their budget coming down, had to make some tough choices.
Well, to reduce that account from 200 million to 89.5 million in 1 year is not a, it doesn't match the ratio of other spending cuts in other parts of the budget. This one took a disproportionate hit. How come?
Sir, the other issue that we're dealing with, and it deals with the Southwest Border Mission, that mission, which the Guard's been involved with for probably 3-4 years now, every year there's money set aside for those 4 states. And we're running close to 200 soldiers and airmen that support that mission. But that money has to come out of Defense's hide every year. And we've been working to try to pass that mission back to Department of Homeland Security. So that money has to come out of our defense budget as well.
I'm not sure I followed you on that.
The 4 states was an add-on mission about 3 years ago, sir. And it came on top of a budget that was already declining.
Yeah.
The intent was for us to help train up agents along the border and then step back from the mission.
In Kentucky, as the Guard transitions from the OH-58 helicopter to the UH-72, I understand that the cost per flight hour will increase by over 100%. That will reduce flight hours for marijuana spotting by 40%, even with good luck in getting the budget back. What can we do to mitigate that dramatic reduction in surveillance and eradication of marijuana?
Chairman Rogers, as you mentioned about the change in the platform from the OH-58 Delta, which would be removed under the Aviation Restructure Initiative to the UH-72. I'd like to take for the record the cost per flight hour, sir, because I want to give you an accurate response on that. The airframe itself, the UH-72 helicopter, is suited for domestic missions. It's configured for those missions. The cost per flight hour is greater, but I want to get you the answer on what that delta is. So if that's okay, I'd like to take that for the record. But that is a fact of the Aviation Restructure Initiative, which will remove all of the OH-58 Deltas, Charlies, and Alphas from the Army National Guard. We agree with that aspect of the ARI. There are cost avoidances that come with that plan in reducing the number of airframes. But that does have the effect of placing that particular mission that you're talking about into a new platform.
General Grass, will these 5 regional training centers just be simply closed and locked and that mission done away with?
Chairman, that is the plan right now, that we've been directed to close them.
Has there been discussion about transferring it maybe to another agency to operate?
Not that I'm aware of yet, but I'm sure that will come up.
You don't sound very upset about this.
Chairman, I've visited them. They're outstanding facilities. In fact, there's many of our local jurisdictions, whether it's Hometown America or a county police force, that will not receive training without those facilities. We provide basically the logistics and the administration of a facility, and then local law enforcement, and they come in and train there.
How much money would it take to keep them going?
Chairman, if I could take that for the record, I'll bring it back to you. I'll get the breakdown for you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Murray?
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. I have 2 areas of inquiry. The first is probably best addressed to Lieutenant General Clarke, but it involves the Warthog and its retirement in this budget. It used to be the primary close air support aircraft, but we find that the Air Force has determined that it's not survivable in current or future conflicts, and then, in fact, 80% of close air support in the Afghan war was provided by other platforms. So of the 343. The intent is to retire 283 of them over virtually the vast majority of them over the next 5 years. That's going to save $4.2 billion is again, the estimate in the budget. What happens to the personnel that have been assigned to the A-10? Are they separated from service? Do they go to other missions? What happens to them, General?
Sir, I can speak on behalf of the Air National Guard, and then I'll give you what my suspicion will happen with the regular Air Force Airmen. For the Air National Guard, wherever we were losing an A-10 mission, we were picking up a different mission that the Air Force had assigned to 4 different locations where we had the airplane. For the regular Air Force Airmen, I would think in their ability to retrain and put people against other requirements that they have, which they have plenty, they'll find another job somewhere in the Air Force.
Well, okay, but the Air National Guard has been using them as, I mean, it is a relevant question, is it not, to the Air National Guard?
With regard to where the airmen are going?
The impact of phasing out the A-10.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Let me ask another question here, Mr. Chairman, and this goes to the civilian workforce. And the reason I'm asking is because it turns out that a great many reservists also serve their country as civilian employees at the Department of Defense. Now, in last year's defense authorization, there was a cut of 5%. In other words, the civilian workforce has to be cut by the same amount as the uniform workforce. It was dubbed the McCain cut. In addition, now we've got a suggestion, and in fact, our very good friends, Mr. Calvert and Ms. Granger, have suggested that we cut the civilian workforce by another 10%. So it's basically a 15% cut. Now, what I want to know is what would be the impact on reservists, and do you think that's going to have to be picked up by more contract personnel? Because that's actually where the most significant increase in personnel has come, is the contract workforce, more than uniform and civilian. But what would be the impact on the Guard and Reserve, particularly the Reserve, if we were to have a requirement of as much as a 15% reduction in civilian personnel over the next 5 years?
Congressman, the personnel that you're talking about, what they call dual status technicians,
that's right,
that serve the Air National Guard.
They're dual status, exactly.
I get your point, because if you brought in airmen who are dual status technician, AGR, or traditional guardsmen, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference in who they are. In fact, if you stood a regular Air Force airman next to them, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between them. So these full-time technicians have an important duty. Mostly their concerns are ensuring that the part-time force is well trained and able to do their job when they're tasked, either at home or overseas. So if we were to lose a good portion of those in our force structure, it'd be devastating to the Guard, because they provide such an important function of training and administrating the part-time force, which is the real strength of the Air National Guard.
So it is interdependent, you're telling us, this civilian workforce.
Yes, sir. We're very, very keenly aware of the issue if we weren't able to retain our dual status technicians. And last year's furloughs significantly impacted us because we were unable to conduct our normal training, so we took a little deficit in training because they were furloughed and during the government shutdown. So our interest is in keeping them actively employed all the time, because the way the Air Force works, the way the total force works for the Air Force, we have to have those individuals doing their jobs throughout the week to ensure that our weekend training and other training opportunities go without a hitch.
I see. Well, that's important to understand. I appreciate that testimony, General. Does anybody else want to comment on the civilian workforce reduction before I...
Congressman, I would add, our full-time manning, specifically our dual status technicians, really are the foundation of our formations. They account for our property, they maintain material, they provide administrative support, so they generate readiness in our formations. And so they're absolutely vital to what we do. I would also offer that reductions in those dual status technicians are accompanied by reductions in force structure because the two are tied together. So there'd be a corresponding effect there also in further reductions as well.
General?
Sir, thanks for the question. It's particularly relevant. In the Army Reserve, we're a traditional force, so without our full-time manning, whether it's 12,700 military technicians or almost 3,000 Department of Army civilians or our AGRs, we might as well just shut down the Army Reserve and go home. And the reason being is they keep everything running. A lot of folks don't realize that you want to process pay to get your soldiers paid, just like a private company would. That has to be done by those full-time manning after the battle assembly is over. We have an all-volunteer force. We've got to make sure that the training is planned well and ready to execute, so when they come in for battle assemblies and collective training events, we're not wasting their time. Otherwise, they won't stay in our all-volunteer force. The biggest way that you can generally save money is to cut your full-time manning. And the Army Reserve is only authorized 13.1% full-time manning, the lowest of any service or component. The average for the reserve component for the DoD is 19.4%, and yet I'm the largest three-star command in the DoD and the second largest command in the Army. So as we start talking about budget cuts and how to pay certain bills, and there's discussion of reducing full-time manning, it will have an incredibly negative impact on the Army Reserve. I would de facto not be able to no longer operate a functional unit or functional capability if they significantly reduce my full-time manning.
Okay. Well, thank you. That's very helpful to get on the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Moran. Ms. Granger.
Thank you. Thank you all for your service and for being here today. We appreciate it very much. And General Talley, thank you for sharing that story about the family. I know everyone here has had the same experience, but I've lost 37 from my district in these two wars, and I always go out and visit the families, and with not a single exception, without a single exception, the families told me how proud their son or brother was in serving, and so that says a lot about what you're doing. I'm concerned about the future of the Air National Guard C-130 fleet. This time, I understand there are only 2 units that are currently operating the new J model aircraft, while 15 other states are operating the legacy H models. And as I understand, the crew size and the training requirements are different with the H and the J, with considerable difference in operating costs also. So perhaps most troubling is the possibility that all the legacy C-130s will be grounded by 2020. General Clarke, it seems to me like we're running out of time to fix this issue. So what recommendations do you have to continue to keep the very relevant C-130s going forward?
Congresswoman, the C-130s, right now, they're still in production. The C-130Js are coming off the line. The Air Force is recapitalizing with the C-130Js. That is one pathway, is to go after recapitalization with new airplanes to replace the older H-model airplanes. But in the meantime, as you pointed out, the time to do that is short, and yet we also have other concerns with being able to operate the aircraft in airspace that's going to require some modifications. So there are desires to have modernization to the H-model C-130s, which would be the second pathway, in order to ensure that we can get to the recapitalization. The current plan is, from my perspective, best if we find what minimum modernization dollars are required to ensure safety, reliability, and compatibility of those aircraft to comply with combatant commander requirements, which requires flying through international airspace and our own domestic airspace. If we can meet those with the dollars required to do that, we can then move on to the recapitalization with newer C-130s. That would be my true path of how we would make this a healthy fleet.
Good. Would you keep us informed as that's going forward?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming in to testify. General Lyons, good to see you again. We just had a nice recent visit. In the testimony, you indicate that at the current time, your equipment readiness looks to me to be in the range of about 90% on average. Is that, in fact, a true reading of where you are? And what's the projection going out 5 years, particularly if we go back into a sequester mode in FY16?
Thank you, Congressman. There's two pieces to this. There's the equipment on hand and then equipment readiness. And both of those are at their highest levels that they've ever been. And much of that is directly related to the work of the committee in providing funds for us to modernize our equipment and improve our equipment on hand through NGREA. So we are at historic highs right now, both in equipment on hand percentage and equipment readiness. So you asked about projecting out 5 years. My concern is, as we look at taking, for example, FY15 and the reduction in O&M dollars specifically, that allows us to maintain that equipment and creates an additional backlog on maintenance and repair specifically, that readiness level that we're at is going to degrade over time as a result of reductions in those funding levels. So it is difficult to project out 5 years. I do think it is safe to say, though, that at reduced funding levels in our O&M accounts, those readiness levels that you mentioned are going to come down proportionately.
Thank you. As you have seen units deploy and return, are you being adequately, or the troops being adequately provided mental health services in the communities in which they live as they return from deployments?
Congressman, we are focused very hard on that, about the effects of deployments, about the reintegration of our men and women into our formations. We try and approach this over the deployment cycle, what we call it, so maintaining touch points with our men and women as they're getting ready to deploy, staying in touch with their families and the soldiers while they're deployed, and then when they return home at the 45, 60, and 90-day window, having the opportunity to get face-to-face with those men and women and do an assessment. So we have dedicated full-time resources to that in the form of directors of psychological health in the 54 states, territories, and the district. We have 78 of those hired today. Thanks to the Congress and this committee, we have an additional $10 million that has been made available to us. We anticipate that that's going to allow us to double the number of behavioral health providers in our formations. These are master's level, credentialed behavioral health providers. So we remain focused on it, Congressman, and we use every opportunity that we have to interact with our men and women in a geographically dispersed force during drill weekends, annual training, and when they return home.
Are you having any difficulty recruiting providers?
Not that I'm aware of, sir.
The reason I asked that question is we had the Surgeons General in the other day for testimony, and certainly in rural areas, that issue of lack of providers is found both in the civilian and the military population.
Yes, sir, and that's probably a fair observation. You know, as I mentioned, the directors of psychological health that we have right now are in our Joint Force headquarters, which is the state headquarters. It does stand to reason that as you get out into more remote communities, that pool to draw on may in fact be reduced. But what I'll do, sir, is I'll take that for the record, and I'll come back to you on the population that we're drawing on to hire those personnel and give an answer
where
on
they're
that.
geographically dispersed would
Yes, sir.
also be helpful. Thank you. I yield back.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Owens. Mr. Crenshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here and for your service. I want to ask about the size of the National Guard. Maybe, General Grass, I'm sure you're aware that when you talk about restructuring and reducing the size, not only of the active services, but the Guard and the Reserve, that causes a certain amount of consternation back in the States. And I can tell you, in a state like Florida, where you have a unusually active Guard, not only in terms of defending us abroad, but also meeting some of the needs. There was a time when we had 4 hurricanes in a 3-week period. And so you couple that with the fact that in a state like Florida, it actually has the lowest ratio of guardsmen to population. I think we're number 54 out of 54. And so my question is, when you meet with the Army to decide about this restructuring and reduction, do you take into consideration the different needs in the different states, the different sizes in terms of ratio to population, questions of readiness? Some states are more ready to go than other states. Talk about the factors that went into those decisions.
Congressman, two things that occur here when we go through the analysis, and both my partners here could go into great detail, but the first one is when we have to make a reduction across the board. We work with the Adjutants General, and we've developed a model that we plug the numbers in of what the reduction is. And it takes in the recent deployments, it takes in the readiness accounts, it takes in the demographics. But we always realize there has to be a baseline of command and control units in place, because just having soldiers and airmen in there doesn't accomplish the mission when it's time to respond to a hurricane or any type of a disaster. The second part, though, that in addition to the model, that we're taking a serious look at right now, and my plans chief has been working on this for a year and a half with FEMA and with NORTHCOM, is we've never been able to model for the states we call the worst night in America. You know, something well beyond a Hurricane Katrina. One of the exercises we're getting ready to run right now is on the west coast of the United States in California. An 8.2 earthquake, you know, in downtown Los Angeles or on the New Madrid. So now we're modeling it. We've brought in the state plans, which are synchronized between the National Guard and the local responders. And we're looking at where the gaps and seams are in that. And that should generate for the future the plans that we will build to. And Administrator Fugate has been great supporting us on this, giving us the ideas of the response time. And we have 10 essential functions that we look at, that we use in just about every disaster. So we will be looking at how those are positioned across the country. So a lot of work to do to get to that. Right now, what we're working at is with the current round of cuts and the number I mentioned under the Budget Control Act and sequestration of going down to 315,000 from, you know, by the end of 15, we're going to be down to 350,200 Army Guard and about 105,000 Air Guard. When we drop that low, I'm very concerned about the response times. We'll still have people, soldiers and airmen that can move. We'll have reduced command and control, and the response times to get in and help is going to be longer.
Thank you. A quick follow-up maybe to what Chairman Rogers.
Absolutely.
Just take a second.
And would you yield to me after you're through the question?
Please.
I just have
Yes,
a brief
sir.
question.
You know, Chairman Rogers talked about the counter-drug program, and what's interesting is, I think we all agree it's a great program, and while you don't always ask for the money, Congress always puts money in. But the last couple of years there's been like $100 million that expires because it wasn't spent and then it wasn't transferred to another account. Can you explain that?
Congressman, one of the problems we deal in, and that most of that money comes in pay and allowances. So like last year, we got the money in June. Our fiscal year ends the end of September. So we had to cut back at the start of the year because we didn't have the money to keep people on duty. And when we got the money, now you're looking at trying to hire people to come in, and you got to get them trained up. And we ended up running out of time to spend the money. It was hard to, it was about $130 million, I think, last year that we had to try to use, and we didn't want to waste it in any way. We wanted to make sure it was used effectively out in the communities with each state. But it's that up and down that makes it very difficult.
Would you yield to me? I just want to, my predecessor told me once, and told me, General Clarke, does the Air Force Guard have any C-130s in Florida?
I'm sorry, sir, does the Air Guard have?
Any C-130s in Florida?
No, sir.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I don't want to add on to your anxiety, but you know that workhorse would be, I think, pretty valuable in a state that has, you know, faced so many incredible crises. Ms. McCollum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First off, on the dual status, I'm really glad Mr. Moran asked the question. It's something that's been on my mind to kind of get out on the table because intimately familiar, even as a young child, what dual status meant to a family, what it means to our military, and what it means to our Department of Defense. And I bring that up because right after 9/11, there was a lot of confusion as people were getting called up in the Guard, you know, with dual status. Which health care plan is my family on? Which health care plan am I on? And it was a real mess. And a lot of people, when we called up and picked up the phone, started talking to people, even the Pentagon didn't know what we were talking about. So I hope that that protocol or whatever got put in place has finally been working for those dual status people, remains in place and remains fresh and kept up to date, because if they're called up again, I would hate for us to have to go back and have those families go through the struggle that they were and have a serviceman or woman be employed one whether or not when they were leaving, if their family had health insurance or if they were going to be in an insurance gap, which many of them were afraid that were going to be. And Mr. Chair, I hear the committee loud and clear, and to sum up, I think what we're going to be working on is, my grandmother said, when you borrow or use something, you return it in good condition, maybe even better condition. And so I think we want that our guards are at that point, and then to make sure that our guards are equipped. I know when Minnesota's National Guard wasn't any different than any of the other National Guards when they didn't have enough equipment, when they didn't have enough body armor, when they were being deployed. And our men and women tend to have either white for snow training or green for forest training. So they weren't the right camouflage color when they were leaving, and so those kinds of things I hope that this committee working with you will keep up on. But what I would like to ask the National Guard about is military sexual assault, because the Guard has a very, very unique role, as well as the reserves do, with the people who are involved in your units. The Pentagon's reported about 5,400 instances of sexual assault or unwanted sexual contact were reported in the military last year, which was a 60% rise from 2012. This is a disturbingly high number, and there's ongoing investigations and new revelations of misconduct and sexual assault within the ranks, and that's a very issue that this committee takes very seriously and wants to see addressed. The Guard, because in many ways the way people enroll, it's families, it's friends, it's cousins, it's neighbors, it's people you went to high school with, people you work with. I mean, these really are family, community-based units. So one of the questions I had asked Mr. Lyons is kind of like, how does the Guard address this, and has this been a problem in the Guard? Speaking to Guardswomen who have been activated and one reservist, the attack that was perpetrated on him was not by a fellow guards person or a reservist. It was a person in quote-unquote traditional active duty. So could you tell me what kind of programs you're looking at? What do you think we need to do better to address sexual assault? But foremost, I would like you to answer a question. How do you treat sexual assault? Because you don't do things within the command and within the ranks, do you not? Do you not turn them over usually to outside prosecutors? Who would ever like to go first?
Congresswoman, let me start by saying that this is a serious problem that we all take extremely, extremely seriously. And I would tell you that as a member of the Joint Chiefs, we spend quite a bit of time on this topic. And one of the things we've done within the National Guard is I've made it clear to my counterparts on the Joint Chiefs that we do have some issues that are different, and we have to address them differently. So if we have someone on a drill status on a weekend and a sexual assault occurs and the state does not have a uniform code of military justice, their only tool may be to turn to a local prosecutor. And we find that unless there's strong evidence, if alcohol is involved, they'll normally not take the case. So what we want to do is provide a better legal framework for that. So we stood up about 2 years ago and started training, and it's our Office of Complex Investigations. They're trained legal members from the Guard, and they're from other states. We're up to 92 now that have been trained at Fort Leonard Wood. And all it takes is a call from the state, and we will send them in. The nice thing about our team is that they can come from another state. They can walk in. The victim doesn't have to know the person, where inside the state, a victim may know the legal framework there, the legal representatives. So we're very, very committed to doing this, these 92. We've sent the teams out to states. We write the report. Some states do have a UCMJ, Title 32, under the governor and under the adjutant general, and they're taking action as these cases come forward. Soon, within probably 2 weeks, I'll be able to sign off on a special victims counsel program
that the Army is going to be giving us approval for. I know the Air Force has already given the Air Guard, so you have a special counsel for the victim in Hometown America. So we have a lot of actions underway. We need to continue to hammer this home. What we're seeing right now is possibly increase in the number of reporting, but we're also seeing is some of those reports were 2-3 years ago, or even before the person got in the military. So we think we're making a progress toward people being comfortable to report so we can get after the problem.
Would you say in those states where you're doing, where you turn it over to the state, it's outside of quote-unquote what is discussed here, the traditional chain of command? Has that influenced or weakened the Guard in any way?
Ma'am, I'd have to go back and look at the statistics on it.
Mr. Lyons?
Ma'am, I might offer that in those circumstances where you're talking to is that the commander of the unit will still take action based on the results of the civilian prosecution. So a unit commander, if a perpetrator is convicted in civilian court, the unit commander is going to take action to on the military side as a result of that conviction. So there still is involvement. You know, we've applied full-time resources towards this issue. We have 95 sexual assault response coordinators and full-time victim advocates in the states, territories, and the district. We've also trained 2,400 collateral duty victim advocates to push down advocacy for victims to the lowest level that we can across our formations. You know, it's kind of the 3 lines of effort here that General Grass talked to, which is prevention, making sure that we're ensuring that we have a culture of dignity and respect in our formations, where our men and women feel safe and secure and can participate to their fullest potential. We use the Office of Complex Investigation. We partner with local law enforcement, and then we hold accountable through the mechanisms that General Grass talked about.
So to sum up, would it be fair to say in areas where, you know, these acts are committed within the United States, within a state, turning it over as a criminal matter to the state and doing the dual track and still doing the discipline within the military, that has not affected, weakened, or diminished your chain of command?
Ma'am, I can tell you that, again, going back to the Joint Chiefs, we've had many conversations about this.
I'm not asking the Joint Chiefs. I'm asking you folks. I'm asking the Guard and I'm asking the Reserve. I've heard from the Joint Chiefs.
Yes, ma'am. And taking the commander out of the loop is the wrong thing to do. We need to hold them accountable for this and give them the tools to execute.
Sir, I didn't say to take the commander out of the loop. I still said that the military can go forward and do its thing. I asked if prosecuting this in a criminal court in any way. I mean, that's what you're doing now in most cases. So are you saying your chain of command's been weakened over these past years in the way that you've conducted your sexual investigations and turned things over?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Just for the record, if you'll yield, we did put we put $25 million in there, not only for the regular military, but for the Guard and Reserve, and we assume that part of that money is being used towards making sure these situations do not continue. Let me associate myself with Ms. McCollum. I think all of us do. Not going to tolerate this kind of behavior.
Well, Mr. Chair, I mean, my point simply is that, you know, right now, the Guard and the Guard, if there's a crime committed, they prosecute it, you know, when they can in the regular traditional criminal court system, and then they still have their ability to punish and to discipline within the military system. And so that is a system that has worked well for women all across this country and for men who have been assaulted as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. McCollum. Mr. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you gentlemen for your service. I apologize for arriving late, but as we all know, the committee schedule is pretty hefty right now. You may have covered some of this in your testimony. I want to direct my question to General Grass and also General Talley, at least initially. When I first came to Congress, it was in January of 2003, and before Iraq, but just before. And I was really incredibly impressed with the Guard and the Reserve and the manner in which they responded. The assumption at that time
was very much that the Guard and Reserve were just that, a strategic reserve. But to watch them transform themselves into an operational force as quickly as they did and over the amount of time that they have is pretty amazing. And it's clearly, you know, an extraordinarily important part of when we go to war now as to whether or not the Guard and the Reserve are capable of doing that with that kind of speed. What concerns, if any, do you have if we were to revert to the sort of 2001, 2002 strategic reserve model as opposed to being what I think you are today, which is an exceptionally capable operational force?
Congressman, it would be very unfortunate for the United States of America and the governors of the states. I've had a chance in a year and a half in the job to visit 27 states, 7 countries where our men and women are serving. Last week I was in Afghanistan. This force in the National Guard, both at home and overseas, is something I've never seen in my 44 years in the Guard. And I would tell you that my biggest concern is as we draw down, and we draw down the resources, these men and women will look for something else to do, and will lose that strength, that capability. Last week, a town hall in Camp Leatherneck, talking to guardsmen that are right there on the point of the spear, helping to tear down the facilities. And I asked them, are you being deployed too much? They looked at me, said, no, predictability is good, but no, we want to be a part of something bigger. I said, but if we know that the numbers are going to come down, when you get us back home, you better give us dynamic training. You better keep our weekend drills dedicated to taking our time and giving us the skills we need, because we know, based on what's happening to our military, if something happens in the world, we're going to have to go quicker. So we want to be ready quicker.
Sir, and if I can add, oh, I'm sorry, General Talley, go ahead. You know, as we look at this post-9/11 generation, you know, 87% of our Army Guardsmen have joined since 9/11. So they've grown up in this operational tempo, this operational reserve that we're all accustomed to. I use my own family as an example. My spouse is in the Guard, my stepson's in the Guard, my middle son is in the Guard. So 4 deployments between us.
Are they all married?
What's that?
Are they all married?
One is, sir.
Well, very understanding spouse.
Sir. Yes, sir. So
make sure that gets in the record.
Nearly 50% of our Army Guardsmen and women are veterans, and so as General Grass highlighted, you know, the challenge is we have to keep them engaged. We have to provide them the operational opportunities that are out there, either in training or in operational missions. Things like combat training center rotations, which are the culminating training events that we have. The opportunity to serve overseas, continue with our state partnership program, remain engaged, because as he so rightly said, if we don't offer those opportunities and to develop our leaders of the future, my fear is, as the acting director, is that they will decide they have something better to do with their time. They feel value, they feel contribution in what they've done over the last 13 years, and they're eager to do more. That's the sense that I get from our men and women that serve.
General Talley.
Congressman, thank you for the question. Like General Odierno and Secretary McHugh, my biggest concern is if we ever ask a soldier to go do a mission and they're not properly trained, resourced, and led. And I think if they are properly trained, resourced, and led, it doesn't matter what component they're from. But for the Army Reserve, as the Army has morphed and changed over the years, and we've become de facto almost all of the enablers for the total Army, because most of our regular Army is the tooth, and the Army National Guards are in many ways a miniature version of Big Army, but almost all those enabling skills that we need to support those combat missions are in the Army Reserve. So our demand signal stays the same in the Army Reserve, whether we're no longer executing named operations, combat operations, or when we're switching to contingent operations. So we've got to be ready. Well, those contingent missions may not require us, afford us the flexibility of going to a MOB site. You may have to go right away. And so for us, it's all about readiness. It's making sure that as the resourcing goes down, we've got to have enough op-tempo money and resourcing to keep those enablers ready, because we provide that support not only to the Army but to the total force. Thanks for the question, sir.
No, thank you. One other quick question, and the answer may not be too quick, but obviously we've heard a good deal the debate and discussion about the differences of opinion over air assets and what's happening given what we're all going through, a very difficult downsizing and readjustment. Are there other areas that particularly concerned you beyond that in terms of the decisions that are being made right now? And are you comfortable that in the decision-making process you've had the opportunities to state your case and work back and forth with the regular Army to and regular Air Force, what have you, to you know, just to work through this together and come to common solutions to joint problems?
I can go first because I've got the easy part of this discussion. Yes, sir, absolutely. Working with the Air Force senior leadership, unquestionable, the outstanding collaboration we have with the senior leadership is there. I mean, they pull us into every decision. They want to ensure that we have an opportunity to voice our opinions. Remarkably, this past year, was the first time that the Air Force asked Adjutants General to be a part of the programming decisions, to sit there and give their voices and let their voice be heard. They were representing all of the Adjutants Generals out there for the broad issues, but they had an opportunity to inject their opinion on, and it was quite helpful, I think. I think General Welsh really appreciated them being there for the discussion. So for us, it's working very well, and I think in the future, particularly under Secretary James and General Welsh, we can look forward to more of that.
Sir, I am concerned about the impact of budget reductions specifically into FY15. We compete in the same Army processes for budget decisions. So where I see the risk that we're going to assume here is specifically in the readiness of our formations. As we look ahead to FY15, in terms of op tempo, our ability to resource combat training center rotations will not be there. The rotations may be scheduled, but the funding, both in paying allowance and O&M to support that, is not there. We'll see impact in our base operations support, which is support for everything we do across our armories across the nation there. We'll see risk in our sustainment, restoration, and modernization accounts. So as I talked in my opening statement about the average age of our facilities being about 44 years, and there's variances in that across the nation, as things break, our ability to repair them, we will continue to defer that maintenance over time here. And so when you have an old facility and you're deferring maintenance, it just exacerbates the issue, and that reduces our readiness. We'll see impacts in our depot maintenance as well. But what I'm very concerned about is our ability to, again, engage our men and women and sustain the leaders that we have that have been honed over 13 years of hard-fought and hard-won experience, but also build that next generation of leaders. And so our pay and allowance and our O&M accounts directly contribute to our ability to do that. And so that's an area of concern.
Okay. Very briefly, because I want to give Mr. Adderhold a chance to put his marker down here since he's been very patient. Maybe you don't have any. Oh, yes, General Talley.
Sir, quick response. I have direct access to Secretary McHugh and General Odierno daily. I can get to see them anytime I want, and I have, particularly, as you might guess, on the issue of end strength and force structure. What I asked the boss is, it's really how do we properly balance our Army, light, medium, heavy forces, active guard, and reserve, and how do we assume risk and provide the cost savings that we have to provide to the Secretary of Defense. The only thing I've asked the boss to do is allow me to make those recommendations to you as how we might downsize the Army Reserve and how I can provide the cost savings to you. The boss has allowed me to do that. There's been a lot of discussion, a lot of give and take. At the end of the day, though, I pitch my case to the boss. He makes the decision and then makes that recommendation to Congress. He's allowed me to do that.
Congressman, if I could, one of the toughest issues that we have to deal with in the Department of Defense is finding the right mix between our active component and our reserve component. And of course, we just went through that with the Air Guard, and I think we've come up with a very good analytical way ahead. The way we've formed a team, task force continuation, stood up by General Welsh, is really helping to inform that, the metrics that go into that, so we get it right for the nation. I think we have to do the same thing inside the Army.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Mr. Adderholt.
Thank you. I'll be brief here. The National Guard has consistently included modernized Humvees among their top funding priorities, and funding was included in FY13 and FY14 to establish a multi-year program to modernize the rapidly aging fleet. I'm aware that the partnership between the Army National Guard Bureau and industry has yielded an effective public-private partnership to rapidly fill like new vehicles to Guard units nationwide as part of this program. The question would be, what kind of impact will these upgrades have on the Guard's ability to perform its mission?
Thank you, Congressman. It has direct impact, and I want to thank the committee for their generous support in FY13 and FY14 for providing those dollars that does exactly what you just talked about, which is modernize legacy fleets of our wheeled vehicles. You know, we have a variety of variants of Humvees in particular, and so those dollars are going to continue to allow us to modernize those vehicles. And so that has a direct impact on our readiness both for overseas missions and our domestic missions at home.
Let me just follow up. As we're looking for FY15 funding, what impact would additional funding have in respect to the Guard's initiative to upgrade the Humvees?
Thanks, Congressman. We still continue to have legacy variants of our Humvee fleet, so we would look to continue to modernize.
Sir, thanks for the question. Like the National Guard, we have an aging Humvee fleet, and one of the areas that we'd like to see if it's potentially possible to get additional resourcing would be how do we modernize those Humvees, particularly as it relates to ground ambulances. I own almost all the doctors and nurses for the total Army. The Guard was able to get some additional funding last year where they can convert some of their Humvees into ground ambulances. Great initiative. We'd like to do exactly the same thing because there's no program of record fix for that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Visklosky, sorry.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. General Lyons, you had mentioned that about 50% of the Guard members are veterans. To what extent do you think there are still, and General Talley, you may want to address this as well, bureaucratic barriers for soldiers moving from active service to the Guard as well as the Reserve, that we could expedite this? Because obviously you do have that training, you've got that expertise, desire to serve. Are there things that can improve that flow of talent?
Thank you, Congressman. We do want to capitalize on the opportunity to have serving active component soldiers transition seamlessly into the Army National Guard. As we speak, we're engaged in a pilot program called AC to RC, active component to reserve component. So I have career counselors at Fort Hood, Texas, that engage early on. And so as an active component soldier is making a decision to come off of active service, typically that engagement would occur anywhere from 3 to 6 months from that decision to leave. What the AC to RC program will allow us to do is to extend that window out to about a year, where that active component soldier gets exposed to the opportunities both in the Army National Guard and the Army Reserve early on in the process. And then a second goal of that program is if that service in the Army National Guard requires a change of their military occupational specialty, that they make that change while they're on active duty. So the end result is the active component delivers a trained soldier into the paragraph and line number in the Army Guard formation. And so we have readiness that's maintained.
For the skill that is needed.
Yes, exactly, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, just to piggyback on that, what we need to do is regular Army's got to draw down in its force structure, and obviously the decision's been made to draw them down at a greater rate than that of Compo 2, the National Guard, and Compo 3, the Army Reserve. We've got to emphasize soldier for life here. Soldier for life is not leaving the regular Army and becoming a civilian. It's serving in the regular Army, one of our great Army National Guards, or in the Army Reserve. So to promote that, we have to actually extend our AC to RC program, which is a regular Army program, even more. We got to go more than a year out. We need to say, how do we take soldiers that are quality soldiers, combat men and women, veterans, allow them to leave the active Army early, and then finish their commitment in the Army Reserve or the Army National Guard as we pull, not push them from our force, the regular Army force, and then train them in a career using, in our case, the Army Reserve's Employers Partnership Program, which was the initial program that eventually became Heroes to Hire for OSD. Thanks, sir.
Is that, if you would, a pilot program as well, in a sense?
The pilot program that's being implemented right now that we're testing at Fort Hood was really a discussion between the active Army, the Army Reserve, and the Army National Guard at Fort Hood. And it's allowing us to go in using Army Reserve and Army National Guard resources to pull folks or to get with them a year in advance. My argument is I still think that's far enough. We got to go more than a year in advance, because by the time they get to the transition point, they've already kind of made their mind up. And what we want to do is be able to get them earlier and to allow them to understand that there may be a way that they can start training into a different MOS, occupational specialty, that would allow them a more viable civilian career transition. General O's got a cash flow issue. He's got to get cash flows quicker. He's going to have to draw it on quicker than perhaps he might like. We could take advantage of that and help the rest of the Army by a more aggressive AC to RC program.
You mentioned the pilot program as well as what you're doing in reserve. We're going to hold a hearing about a year from now. Will the pilot program be completed? Will you have a better assessment as to whether this will facilitate and ease that movement of talent?
Short answer is yes, sir. We're the Army G1 Howard Bromberg. We're anticipating we should be able to get some sort of metrics to determine whether or not it's going to work or not. We hope by mid-summer, mid to late summer. And then the idea is, if we do, we want to then expand that across all of the major military installations to try to capture the AC to RC. And a point that I made earlier this morning is we also need to break down the barriers for the other services. In other words, if you serve in another service and you want to come into the Army, right now often we make you repeat basic training. I don't know why we do that, but we're trying to get that policy changed.
Okay. You say a pilot program, when will that end, General Lyons?
Sir, I'd like to take that for the record
Okay,
because I'm not sure on that, and I want to give you an accurate answer.
If I could, I'd like to draw your attention to two accounts. One, from my perspective, very ephemeral, the Opportunity Growth and Security Initiative account that I'm assuming will be plussed up fully once we do changes to entitlement programs and pass tax legislation this year. Do you have requests for your various services in that account as a proposal? And just generally, yes or no. I'm not interested in specifics at this point.
Congressman, we did submit unfinanced requirements to be included with the Department of Defense.
Let me ask then, in conjunction with that question, about another account, and that's the National Guard and Reserve Equipment account that apparently somebody in the administration forgot to put any money in for a request for 15. If in 2015 that account receives funding, would there be items of particular interest to your services to be included in that? And would any of those be also represented in that Opportunity Growth and Security Initiative request?
Congressman, first to the NGRIA, again, I want to thank the committee for their continued support in NGRIA funding for the National Guard. It allows us flexibility to procure items that you're getting at that we don't have in the base budget. Specifically in the Guard, I just wanted to highlight the ability to purchase critical dual-use items of equipment, those items of equipment that are good for the warfight, as well as our domestic missions. And thanks to the committee's support, I'm happy to report that we were at 83% in FY10 in critical dual-use equipment, and we're up to 93% in FY14. So that's directly related to the committee's work. I want to thank you for that. As we look ahead, we still have requirements. We have heavy truck fleet requirements, purchase of the chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear, the CBRN enterprise equipment, general engineering vehicles, simulators to train our force. So these are all examples that we would look to use NGRIA funding for in the future, sir, in addition to the Humvee modernization that I talked about earlier with the additional funds the committee has provided in 13 and 14.
Sir, yeah, my appreciation for the INGREA funds from an aviation perspective, again, we found uses in the dual use as well. But from a warfighting perspective, the opportunities we still use the targeting pods that we received. It brought us up to the first string capability. In the National Guard, we didn't have that capability, but we were literally put on the first string when we acquired that capability through INGREA funding. The latest that I've seen is a modification to F-16s where we have a center display unit. The difference in that is trying to view something on a laptop over here versus having a 60-inch TV right here for a pilot. That's a big deal because your ability to discriminate where the enemy is and particularly where the friendlies might be, it's a game changer. We also have helmet-mounted sights now, remarkably good equipment that allows you to, and from my experiences in Iraq, if I look at something, I can designate it with my sight off of my helmet, one push of the button, all my weapons and my sensors immediately go to that point on the ground. That is a game changer. So the INGREA has just been fantastic. But to answer your question, sir, wherever there's a combatant commander requirement that needs to be met, if INGREA helps with it, that's very helpful. And we have a very good process, tight process through Weapons and Tactics Conference to identify which requirements are out there, and then we have a good process for prioritizing which ones we're going to try to fund with INGREA.
Short answers are yes on the UFR list. It's already in. On the GREA, tremendous ability to help the Army Reserve. We're going to reinforce success. We're focused on simulation equipment and making the most of home station training, particularly as we have to come down an op-tempo as it relates to travel money, for example. And since most of our forces enablers, we're focusing on pre-marksmanship instruction, familiarization of weapon systems, how to basically execute trucks and convoy. And then when we do get on the real machines itself and the real equipment, it makes it quicker to train, it makes it safer. We're tremendous value, sir.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Thanks, Chairman.
Gentlemen, you're on your game. We do put money, this committee, in the INGREA account, so it's good to hear that it's being properly utilized. I've been trying to find out from staff, but since I know General Grass has had 44 years service, and let me say, is it 12 as an enlisted man? You may have this answer. How many Apaches do we have in the Army? Would you guess?
We have in the Army Guard about...
I know the Army Guard. I just wondered if you knew what the big Army has. And
732 about.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. It's 732 with an acquisition objective, I believe, of 690.
So following up with Mr. Womack's, he was headed down this path here about the upgraded Apaches. In the interest of full disclosure, this committee put in tell me if this is accurate, General Grass, this committee put in nearly $1 billion to upgrade those Apaches for the National Guard.
Chairman, I have to go back and check that. We were talking to our lawyers today, try to find those documents because they are critical.
I think this committee put the money in there specifically for the National Guard. Don't have to talk to your lawyers. I think we can help validate that.
Yes, sir.
So I think this puts a point on our discussion here. Just sort of shifting gears a little bit here, if you look at the overall defense budget, there are a few areas that have sort of been plussed up, and God only knows we give credit to our special operators for what they do. We may not know where they all are at any given time, but I'm sure some of you, certainly the air component and others, have been responsible for their safekeeping and their air travel and other means of getting here and about. There is a greater investment in cyber activities. Has it been determined? And more importantly, have you shown your interest with the powers that be of being part of that overall endeavor? I guess that goes to you, General Grass. This is what we call a softball.
Chairman, first let me tell you that we have spent a lot of time with General Alexander before he retired. We do an exercise with him every year. We're going to do one this year down at Quantico, Virginia, where we bring in Guard men and women from across the states with cyber skills. We've worked with the Army and the Air, and these gentlemen can give you more detail on what specific units, but we're looking and we're postured and ready to buy into structure as the Army and Air National Guard have it offered to them by the Army and Air Force. We just stood up our first computer protection team, or cyber protection team. It's a 39-person team. We brought it on full-time. They're going through their train-up and certification. We brought those guardsmen and women from across the country, tried to draw them from different states. They will eventually go to Fort Gordon, Georgia. The intent would be as they get up to speed, we would actually eventually send them back to their states. We're hoping to draw an opportunity to fill future cyber protection teams and possibly put one per FEMA region in the future, working very closely with our cyber and AF cyber.
Well, don't hide your treasure under a basket. I think you've got a lot of amazing men and women in all of your Guard and Reserve that can bring their brains and education to the cyber issue. So I think you ought to promote yourselves more. I have not a parochial issue, but I'm interested in the Air Wing at in Atlantic City. They do some incredible stuff. There's concern about the F-16 fleet. They cover a pretty broad territory, so it's more than just the Garden State. They go up and down the coast. Where are we going, General Clarke, with their, what's your priority in your budget quest, and how do we keep the fleet in that location and others around the country modern and relevant?
Thank you, sir. The airmen at the 177th Wing there at New Jersey perform two missions. One is a Homeland Defense mission, 24 hours a day. They're on call to pick up any tasking that NORAD would give them. But additionally, they train to the Air Expeditionary Force as well. So one day they could be tasked for the mission to support the Homeland, and then the next day they could be out the door going to support a overseas contingency. And they've done this multiple times, and they do it very well, mostly because they do it with experienced airmen. For the airplanes themselves, the basic airframe, the Block 30 F-16s that they're flying, are in pretty good shape. We think that because of the earlier Falcon Star program and then the equivalent flying hour program, how they're flown, has extended the life on these airplanes out for a good number of years. So the basic airframe is good. Unfortunately, the budget difficulties, some of the capabilities upgrades will be not forthcoming, but again, with INGRIA and things like that, we're able to meet the combatant commander requirements of the airplane once it does deploy over the seas. So I would tell you that one day we'd like to see new airplanes there, but in the meantime, we're going to do the best we can with the great airmen, first of all, and then airplanes that we've already put some significant funds into to make sure that they're good out through another 10, 15 years.
Thank you. Mr. Womack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to, we've talked a lot about equipment, and that's all well and good, but we're still a very people-intensive organization, as all of our services are. So I've just got a random list of some topics that I'd like some kind of brief answers on. When I was serving, one of my biggest complaints was the fact that I was always stuck with, for lack of a better term, people that were non-deployable. They were protected by certain things, systemic things in the organization. And it was the common complaint of my soldiers is that they didn't seem to have or were concerned about what I call upward mobility through ranks, because a lot of people senior to them just never seemed to kind of go away. And a lot of people that have served a long, long time, and this is no reflection on General Grass, who's already been mentioned as having served a long, long time. It's not that upward mobility I'm talking about. So, if we're going to see a reduction in end strength, which it appears that we are, it would seem to me that the pressure on the service to be able to create upward mobility is going to continue to be, if not a challenge, but a bigger challenge going forward. So when I look at things like medical fitness, whether somebody is deployable or non-deployable, MOSQ, no-val, those kinds of issues that scan the surface of our personnel management system. What are you doing, General Grass and General Lyons, and I'm sure it goes, it's something that's important to the Army Reserve too. What are you doing? What is your vision for how we continue to create the opportunity for the young people joining our force to be able to achieve greater rank and positions of responsibility against a lower end strength?
Congressman, first of all, great support from this committee on medical readiness dollars and our ability to run every year all of our men and women, both Air and Army, through a soldier readiness process has paid us huge events. The Army and Air Guard today are running in the low 80s, I think up to 85%.
Yes, sir. About 83.1% were the highest of all three components today.
Medical readiness, which was unheard of, as you know, before the war. We didn't have the resources. And the dental readiness back then, a lot of folks didn't have dental. And they, you know, if we had to wait till they mobilized, then we had to get them fixed to go. That delayed time. So what we're concerned about now, though, as the dollars shrink, the medical and dental readiness are going to be the first two we really got to watch close. So if someone can't make that and can't meet that, and the resources are there available today, but they're going to have to slowly shift of taking it out of their pocket and go to TRICARE Select for reserve, we're going to have to hold the line there because we're going to have somebody, like you said, standing right there ready to step in their place if they can't meet the medical readiness.
Combat Training Center rotations, it was mentioned earlier. It's a capstone mission for, our capstone event for the reserve components. I'm deeply concerned, both from the AC and the RC side, that we're not going to be able to get our soldiers through these capstone events that are basically the crowning achievement to assess their readiness to deploy downrange.
Yeah, Congressman, I absolutely agree with you. Our posture, the net effect, as I said earlier, will be at individual crew and squad level proficiency. Combat Training Center rotations allow us to either come out of the Combat Training Center rotation at platoon or company level proficiency, which is where we need to be. So that takes funding both in P&A and in O&M. We can schedule the rotations, which we have 2 scheduled for FY15 currently. But again, not the dollars to resource those rotations. So without that, we're going to continue to maintain a force at individual crew and squad level training.
Are we having any problem finding school slots for those that are trying to become qualified in their military occupational specialty?
I think I would answer it this way, Congressman. We will take risk in our MOS qualification opportunities and our special training opportunities, both of which come out of O&M accounts and some P&A. So we will seize every single opportunity we have, every single seat to MOS qualify a soldier. My fear is we may not have the money to occupy that seat.
General Talley?
Sir, on the seat request, we're not able to get enough seats to meet the requirements that we have. That's not the real issue. The real issue is how do you fund, it gets to General Lyons' point, how do you fund the per diem, the travel, the salary to get them to go to that event, particularly as you have a decrease in training funds. A challenge that I highlight frequently, both within Forces Command, the Army, and also to the Congress is Army Regulation 350-1.
Could we just hold the testimony for a minute? There's a moment of silence up on the floor, and if we would take a moment to recognize those loss of life. Thank you, Mr. Womack, and then Mr. Adderholt.
And I know exactly where General Talley was going with his comments. So let me just say this, and then I'll finish. I sense a perfect storm happening for our reserve components. We are seeing the effects of not having the funds, perhaps not having the funds to ensure medical readiness, to get the appropriate people in the right slots, to get them through the combat center rotations. We're seeing issues with regard to the weapons or to the platforms on which they would train and become proficient and serve as an operational force downrange. And we already know that we're not doing some of the missions that heretofore we were doing that are ideally suited, MFO, Sinai as an example. And so I just caution our country about putting our reserve components in a position where they're going to, almost by force, to be not ready to do what this country is going to ask of them at some point down the road. And I'll get off my soapbox on it, but it is a great concern of mine. We're going to continue to talk about it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
We share your concern, Mr. Womack. Mr. Visklosky.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple quick points. One, I truly support the Guards counter-drug program. I think it is very worthwhile, and certainly have seen very positive results in my congressional district. For General Grass and Lyons, just so that my impression is either correct or incorrect, it is my understanding, and we have had a discussion about Humvees, will remain a part of the fleet, if you would, until about 2030. Is my impression correct?
I believe that's accurate, sir.
Okay. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I would point out, while General Clarke has been in your position for 2 weeks, as I understand it, 1 week. You did a heck of a job, but I also understand that General Lyons, during his long career, has been able, up until today, to avoid having to testify before a congressional committee, and think you did a superlative job. You keep at this, you're going to get good.
He's doing pretty well now.
He's doing terrific. Gentlemen, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
On all of our behalf, and to the men and women you represent, the best of America, wherever they may be, God bless you and thank you, and the meeting stands adjourned.
In trouble. This is some of the best barbecue in Phoenix.
This no-frills manly meat shop's got the usual barbecue fare, from beef brisket to pulled pork and rib tips. But it's their most unconventional barbecue specialty that's the star of the smoker.
You won't find another place that starts from scratch with their meatloaf, smokes it, finishes it off on the grill, and then sauces it. And it is just amazing.
Best meatloaf I've ever had. Best meatloaf I've ever had. Everything's perfect.
Meatloaf!
A house favorite for 25 years, the smoked and grilled ancho barbecue meatloaf combines the comfort of home with the zest of smoked barbecue. Dreamed up by owner Andrew Jepson, this slice of meatloaf heaven is a unique blend of pork, beef, veggies, and secret seasonings, like his own allspice blend, prized rib rub, and homemade sauce. Mixed 40 pounds at a time, he believes the key to this lip-smacking loaf is to roll up your sleeves and dig in.
Always mixed by hand. You know, because you really get the feel of how well it's mixed, and you get to kind of feel with your hands the texture of what it's going to be like.
Once mixed and molded, the massive meat mounds head to the smoker for 2.5 hours at 250 degrees.
With the combination of the smoking with